Hi, this is Luann with Rock and Book Reviews, and I'm so happy to be here today with award-winning, best-selling author Ryan Jacobson. Ryan, tell us a little bit about yourself so we can get acquainted with you, like where you grew up and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. I live in Minnesota. I've lived in Minnesota my entire life. I was born and raised in Southwest Minnesota. I grew up in a town called Pipestone. We're famous for a national monument down there. Spent a lot of time playing sports, running around the neighborhood with my friends, and just had a lot of fun growing up, mostly playing football and basketball any chance we got.
And do you have a couple of fond memories that help create the person you are today?
Ooh, fond memories. Oh, I have a lot. Boy, we raised a lot of trouble when we were younger. I remember I was in a ninja club and we used to run around town dressed up like ninjas. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we had a lot of fun. I'd say it was probably more the people than the memories. I was really shaped by a lot of people growing up. My parents, of course, my brothers. It was actually my older brother who got me hooked on reading. I wasn't a real big reader growing up until I was in about 10th grade. And my older brother, Jason, introduced me to Stephen King. And I started devouring every Stephen King book I could find. I can't remember how many I read in high school, but I read a lot of them. And that's really what got me into the world of literature.
So when did you first begin writing your books?
Well, that's a long story. I wasn't much of a writer growing up, not surprising since I didn't really enjoy reading, but I wasn't much of a writer either. What actually got me started writing was 7th or 8th grade. There was an opportunity to follow the high school football team and sort of be the school reporter for the football team. I played football, and when I was told that I would get to stand on the sideline of the games with the varsity team, I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. So I would do just about anything for the chance to like be on the sideline and watch the games on Friday night from the sideline. So I volunteered to do it, and I've been writing ever since. Of course, that was a different kind of writing. That was writing, sports stories and summaries of the games. I probably started writing for fun, like stories and fiction in college. And mostly I was just dabbling in picture books. Nothing ever came of those. I didn't really believe anything ever would. It was just sort of an exercise in writing that I enjoyed. I didn't get serious about writing books until probably my late 20s. That's when it actually started happening for me. I started thinking, yeah, maybe I should be an author. Maybe I should write a book.
What were some of the challenges you faced when you began writing your books?
Well, probably the first big challenge is I had no clue what I was doing. Um, I don't know if I don't know if all authors experience that, but there's nothing scarier than a blank page. And I actually joke about that when I speak with students at elementary schools. We talk about the scariest things in the world, and I tell them the scariest thing is a blank page. There's so many possibilities, and it can make your brain explode. I mean, if you stand there and stare at that blank page long enough, it's very intimidating. So that's probably been my biggest challenge, is just figuring out how to start. And that's still a challenge for me. What I've learned to do for myself is that I create outlines for my stories. It just feels like I'm getting momentum. So I try to outline the entire story, and I almost never stick to the outline, but having an outline just feels like I've started. And so then I can just delve into it and continue that momentum into writing the actual stories.
You're a father of how many children?
I have 2 boys.
2 boys. And you keep them on a fairly set routine schedule, correct?
Absolutely.
Now, how did you manage that? Most of us parents can't do that.
Well, I don't think I think we all have the same or similar struggles. It's not an easy thing to do. It helps that my wife is the kindergarten teacher, and she is very structured and very organized. I guess the secret to it, if I were going to tell a new parent one thing, it's make your routine, make your rules, and stick to them unwaveringly. You make an exception one time, they're going to be asking for that exception every day for the rest of their lives.
So what's your basic routine each day?
Well, It's changed a little bit as they've gotten older, but especially when they were younger, we had an after school routine where they would come home and they would do their homework. They would spend a little bit of time reading. Then for a half hour before supper or dinner, they would have free time where they could, play games, hop on their video games if they wanted to at that time. Then after supper, it was family time. So we always did something as a family, and there was some flexibility there. We'd go for a walk, we'd go to the park, we'd play a board game, we'd watch a movie. We always ended our evening with a half hour of TV time together, where we would watch usually a cartoon or something like that. And then it was to bed and a quick story and lights out.
So how has it changed that much since you've had teenagers?
They don't want to do any of that stuff anymore.
So
They want to play video games, and they only want to play video games. So we let them play a little bit more than we used to. And actually, it was hard not to let them play during the COVID pandemic, of course, because video games is now social time. It's not like when I was a kid, when you played a video game, you're either by yourself or with one friend who's sitting next to you playing. Now it's all online and they're communicating with their friends online. So that was like social time for them. So it's kind of hard to take that away now when that became the routine. So we're a lot more flexible now as long as they're getting their work done. We try to make time for reading almost every day, although they're not as avid readers as they were before the pandemic. But we do still every night get together before bed, sit down, watch a show. It's not a cartoon anymore very often. Usually it's more of a sitcom, a Modern Family, or my youngest is really into The Simpsons now. So we watch that.
that is not a good show.
We loved it.
I was appalled at the way they do. I said, I wouldn't want my kids behaving that way. So.
Well, it helps that they're a little older now. We were very careful about what they watch. Well, especially, I think every parent knows this. With the first one, very, very strict about what we would let him watch. And by the time the second one came around, it's like, go ahead. Yeah, we'll watch that. But now that they're a little older, The Simpsons is fairly new to both the kids.
How do you limit their video time? I find that that's a big problem with a lot of parents these days.
It is a problem. Basically, it's a little bit lax right now in the summer because they have so much free time. It's not so much a problem with my oldest anymore because he has a job. So he's working, 6 to 8 hours a day. So if he wants to come home after working and play video games for a few hours, as long as he's doing it with his friends and being social about it, that's just fine. With the younger one, we do sometimes have to put a limit on it, but we do try to make sure they're exercising every day and they're reading every day. And most days after supper, we try to, do something like we always have, a board game, watch a movie or something.
Well, it sounds like if most parents would follow your example, we'd be in a good situation. So in the world, I commend you because I know that once they hit those teenage years, you've kind of lost control pretty much. So.
Well, they do make it easy. They're really good kids.
Good.
They're very, they of course have their struggles like every teenager does. But for the most part, they stay out of trouble and they make good choices. So
I believe strong family foundation is what makes and breaks most of the children in the world, including as adults. So.
Well, it definitely starts with the structure. If new parents are out there looking for advice, it's create that structure and stick to it unwaveringly.
I think that's great. Okay, you wrote a publication, Get Kids Reading in 5 Easy Steps. What are those 5 easy steps?
Testing my memory here. I don't know how long ago I wrote that. I think they're fairly obvious. Obviously, the two big ones are read with your child, or read with your children. That's where it starts, really. Read with them. And make sure you also have them catch you reading. If you're not reading, if they don't see you reading in your free time just for fun, you can't really expect them to choose that for themselves. So I think those are probably the two biggest things that a parent can do, especially make sure you're reading to them every day. It doesn't have to be a lot of time, 15, 20 minutes, but make sure you get that in there. Taking them to the library is another one that I remember that being kind of a magical experience for me, going to the library for the first time and like, we can take anything we want out of here. this is awesome. And there's a certain awe factor to that. And it's just, it's so nice to surround children in an environment like that where there are books and book lovers all around them. That's definitely another one. Another one, I'm trying to think of myself and at what got me to start reading. And I think picking the right topics. We had this struggle with my youngest, with Lucas. He still doesn't love to read, but he will read if we find the right topics for him. He's very fascinated with World War II, and that's thanks to YouTube. He learned so much about World War II watching YouTube videos that he wanted to start reading books about World War II.
Great.
So yeah, so we've been finding it. We started with nonfiction. He just wanted the facts. Show me what all the different guns looked like and what the tanks looked like and what the airplanes looked like, and that sort of evolved into narrative nonfiction and then fiction stories too. So he has been reading a lot about World War II. So choosing the right topics for their interests is definitely key. For me, it was Sports Illustrated and comic books. That was about all I read when I was his age. That's definitely a big component, and I'm missing one. Can I think of what it is?
While we're thinking, was either son difficult to get to read to when they were little?
No, not particularly. I mean, they always love to, snuggle up in bed and have a book read to them. I would think most children would be receptive to that. I guess I don't know.
I had two that would absolutely not sit and listen, or even a picture book. I couldn't get it even.
Well, okay, so I stand corrected. I stand corrected.
And I love reason, but I think one thing is my husband doesn't read, and he still hates reading. And so I think that has a bearing on it too. But yeah, I tried very faithfully with my two, and they were both boys, and they would not listen to the books. They wouldn't read the books. They wouldn't. And it was so hard because they wouldn't do their reading assignments in school, and I'd have a lot of problems there. So I just wondered if you had an idea.
Well, I just talked to another friend about this. She was struggling. I can't remember what it was about. What I told her, you give them a choice, give them the power to choose. Just make the other choice undesirable. Like, well, we're going to read this book, or we're going to shut the lights off, and you're going to go to sleep. And if they choose to go to sleep, so be it. Stick with it because that's what you said. Again, I'm generalizing. I have no clue. My children always chose reading the book. 15 more minutes of wake sounded a lot better no matter what.
I've had a lot of friends who's had several children, and they've taught them to read and enjoy reading, and they all like to read. But I thought, I don't know how they did it.
Every child is different, and different things work for different kids.
I have 8, so I always had to try to come up with different ways because like you said, you can't discipline them the same or anything because they're each very individual. We'll let you slide on that last one.
Okay. It's probably the most important one. Actually, though, you know what? This is worth sharing. I just learned this a couple of weeks ago myself. I was talking to a 5th grade teacher, a friend of mine who's a 5th grade teacher, and she told me what she finds is most students will at least read a graphic novel by 5th grade. A higher percentage of students will at least read a graphic novel. Graphic novels, of course, are huge right now. So she finds graphic novels that are also, chapter books. So same story, one is a graphic novel, one is a chapter book, and she'll have them read the graphic novel, and then she'll say, well, if you like that, you can get more of the story here by reading this book. And she says that's very effective.
That's a great idea. Okay. Media states that anywhere from 50 to 70 books you have written. What is the number of books you have written? That's a lot of books.
That's a great question, and I don't know how to answer that. It varies so greatly because, well, first of all, I haven't been counting, but also I've written so many weird things that do they count as books? That I try to be sort of vague about it. I've written an issue of a comic book. Is that a book? Does that count? I've written books that are very limited run. They're not in bookstores. They're just for people following certain channels. So there's 25 copies of a book. Does that count? things like that. So, I mean, there's lots of books that have gone out of print. So it's hard for me to count, and these are spread through, 4 or 5 different computers throughout the last 20 years or so. And so I'm going to have to go and count all of the different manuscripts that I've written and which ones got published. And then I will have an exact total. And when I do, I will let you know. I'd say more than 50 is probably safe.
So how do you determine the books you choose and how do you accomplish them?
Well, I choose the books that I'm going to write largely based on my own interests, and I try to imagine as a middle grade reader, and what kind of books I would at least think about reading, what kind of books might interest me. So that has always been my driving force. Is this a book that I would have liked to read? And if it is, then I'll pursue it. Of course, also I want to write books that interest me now, so I do try to stick to topics and genres that I enjoy. Once I decide, yep, this is a book I'm going to do, like I mentioned earlier, the first thing I do is I create an outline, as detailed an outline as I can get, so I know exactly what's going to happen in every single chapter. And once I have all of that outlined and figured out, I get to writing it. I don't know if this is interesting or not, but I used to always write in notebooks and then go to type it after it was in the notebook. I have stopped doing that because my hands get tired now that I'm getting older. So, strictly on computer, and I almost never stick to the outline. But it's sort of amazing how the brain works. And as I'm writing a story, so many better ideas are generated that fit better with what's happening in the story, that the outline usually goes out the window, a quarter to halfway through.
Well, I don't see how you can stick to an outline with the interacting books you write.
Yeah, well, that's an entirely different process. Although it still is, at their core, they still are stories. It's a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's just more of an interactive wrinkle to them.
What inspired you to start writing interactive books?
Actually, it was kind of a dare. Another author, friend of mine, had dared me to try it. Of course, I loved those books, and those were some of the first chapter books that I ever read were Choose Your Path, Choose Your Own Adventure books. And I never thought about writing one until I wrote this book called Lost in the Wild. I wrote a manuscript for Lost in the Wild, and I thought it was pretty good. It was about a brother and sister who got lost, in the wild. And so it was basically a survival story, but it felt a little bit flat to me. Like it feels like this could be better. So I was talking to this author friend, Blake, and he said, you should make it into a Choose Your Path book. He's like, you should try it. I dare you to try it. I'm always up for a challenge. So I did. I gave it a try, and I loved it. It made the book so much better, so much more interesting and interactive, and it felt like there was more at stake for the reader. So I've been really interested in doing those books ever since then.
I have a daughter that really got into Choose Your Own Adventure books when she was probably 11, 12-year-old. And then she couldn't find any more. And then she was really bummed. Where the eldest daughter, she tried to read one and it irritated her because she wanted to know what the ending was.
Yeah,
so how do you keep someone's interest and keep your mind sane and be able to focus on the whole thing and still have all these different scenarios going?
Well, it starts
Did you understand that?
I do. I get asked these sorts of questions a lot. I guess I should start by explaining. To keep it simple, there are 2 different types of Choose Your Path stories. The Choose Your Own Adventure story is more like a bunch of short stories chopped up and mixed together. So when you read a Choose Your Own Adventure book, you might read a story and it might be, say, 12 pages long, but you can go back and read the book again and get an entirely different experience. You can do that multiple times. I do it differently than that. I do what's called the golden path. And so with my Choose Your Path books, you're reading one story from beginning to end. It's one thing. If you think of a story as a straight line, the story is a straight line. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. Along the way, you're presented choices, and usually there's a right choice and a wrong choice. Right choice keeps you on that line or on that path to the happy conclusion, to the grand finale of the story. If you make the wrong choice, it branches off that path, and either something bad happens, or you're presented with a choice where hopefully, if you get it right, you can get back onto the path. Does that make sense?
Well, it sounds like real life.
Yeah, pretty much, pretty much. But to keep readers interested, to your original question, I think it starts with that story. I mean, the main story has to be good. If you're not telling a good story, then they probably are going to lose interest anyway. So if the story is compelling, then it's just an added bonus that they get to make choices along the way, find out what happens. What I try to do is I try to keep the choices fairly regular and pretty evenly spread out. So roughly within 5 pages, you're going to get to a choice. So the reader doesn't have to wait long, get their next chance to make a choice.
How many times do you do that through a book?
About 20 to 25 times.
Wow.
Yeah. And, we try to start them off. This is something that the first few we did, I didn't know this. And this was a great piece of advice I was given from a teacher. And she said, you have reluctant readers who are interested in this book, but if they make the first choice and die right away, well, then they're done. They're not going to come back. But she suggested, and we try to do this now, where you make that first choice or two fairly obvious, where they can choose the wrong choice on purpose just to see, what happens. But they'll come back and they'll make the first couple of choices. They'll get some momentum, and then the choices get a little bit trickier. And hopefully by then they're hooked, and they're gonna stick with it no matter what.
Yeah, that would be kind of depressing if you got killed very first of the book.
5 pages in, game over.
Okay, so what tips would you give a writer who wants to attempt to write one of these books? How would you direct them get into it in a good way?
Well, it starts with organization, I think. Once you have that story idea, or once you know what your main story is going to be about, it takes organization, and it does take some creative thinking. The way I do it, and it's probably different for everybody, but the way I do it is I'll write that main story, I'll outline it and write it. And as I'm doing that, I try to consciously think of, okay, here's a spot where the character can make a decision. And then here's the next spot where the character is going to make a decision. So you do have to sort of plant those into the story. And every once in a while, I'll have a huge gap where there isn't a choice, where you're talking 12 to 15 pages and no choices. So in those instances, I will probably more often than not try to manufacture at least one choice in there, and hopefully it flows okay. But I think it's important to keep the reader making choices every so often, as opposed to these long gaps where there is nothing to decide. What else? Oh, practice writing in second person. That is a mental exercise that takes some getting used to. Everything is you do this, you do that as you're writing a Choose Your Path book, and it's really easy to fall into, first person or third person. It's a fun writing exercise, but it does pose its challenges.
And how do they keep from being distracted with all the, I think it's amazing. I just can't imagine writing something that complex.
Yeah, well, it's not as complex as it probably seems. I mean, if you're picturing the story as one long line, and I do show this to students, even talk to them in 4th and 5th grade. It's easier when I can, draw it on the blackboard or something. But you picture the story as one long line, and so you're writing a story. If you can write a story, you can turn it into a Choose Your Path book. In most cases, without too much effort. So once you have that story, you're just going to go in and look for a choice. And now that you've identified the choice, all you have to do is write, well, what happens if the reader makes the wrong choice? Because the right choice is already done. The right choice is just moving forward on that path. And so what I end up doing is I'll write the story, and then I'll go back and write, 20 death scenes. So that gets a little tedious, to be honest, but the end
We
product.
kind of like write the story and then insert the different scenarios.
Yeah, and then chop it up.
Well, you've done a successful job at it with the amount of books you've sold.
We're doing okay. Yep.
What are a couple of goals you'd like to accomplish in the near future?
For writing, my biggest goal right now with the Choose Your Path format is we just want to come up with new, creative, and different wrinkles to make the Choose Your Path experience even better. I know you talked to Deb Mercier, and she and I have been working on a series of mystery books, which I'm really excited about. So the reader is, paging through the book, reading the book, and finding clues. And if they want to, they can have their own little notebook and actually write the clues in their notebook. And then as they get further, they're figuring out who the suspects are, and they're given information that allows them to eliminate suspects, through deductive reasoning. If they find a footprint that's a really big foot, and then one of their suspects, it turns out has really tiny feet, well, then they know, well, that person didn't do it, so they can cross it off their list. And by the time they get to the end, there'll only be one suspect left. And so through deductive reasoning, they'll know that's the person who did it. And so at the end of the book, they get to decide which person they think did it, and then they get to find out if they were right or not. It's a really cool, unique and neat experience that I cannot wait to get these books into the hands of readers. Those are coming out in October.
And Deb is excited to work with you. She has the highest opinion of you. So,
well, the same goes here. I think she is fantastic. She is great to work with.
What is your newest book about?
Newest book, the one that is coming out, I co-wrote one of those mystery books with Deb, and she did the other one. The one Deb did by herself is called The Empty Cabin. The one I co-wrote with her is called The Ghost of Old Central School. I also just did a Choose Your Path adaptation of Can You Survive the Wizard of Oz novel, The Wizard of Oz, adapted into the Choose Your Path format for middle grade readers. So I'm excited for that. There's been a lot of buzz about that. Those are all going to be coming out in October, and we're very excited about them. After that, I have a picture book coming out next spring or I think it's next year. It's called Up Where the Stars Are. And that is about a boy who goes on an imaginary adventure and explores the constellations. That's a picture book. Very excited for that one as well.
Oh, it sounds like you have an amazing variety of interactive books.
Well, Up Where the Stars Are isn't interactive. We do have an interactive picture book called Eagle in the Sky, where the reader gets to be a bald eagle and that one has about, I think, 4 or 5 choices to find out, if they can survive as a bald eagle. That is available now. We're going to probably be redoing that one with a new format in hardcover, I believe in a year or two. We're going to turn that into a series of books, so I'm excited about that as well. But Up Where the Stars Are is just your straight, ordinary picture book, beginning, middle, and end.
For like real young ones.
Yep, ages 4 to 8 roughly.
Okay, and we have a giveaway for a book for a US or Canada winner. Which book will that be?
Can You Survive the Wizard of Oz is the giveaway.
That's great. And I'm sure that whoever wins it will love it. And I'm excited to read more of your books and to also see what you're coming out with, Deb.
We're very excited.
Is there any final comments you'd like to make before we close?
I guess if people are interested in learning more about these books, the easiest way to find them is to go to chooseyourpathbooks.com.
We'll post that on the site and also on YouTube. Thank you so much. This was a delight, and hope we visit again in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we hope that you all will search the universe through books. Goodbye.